Hello YouTube and welcome to another episode of The Obsoletist. Today I'm going to be putting this into this. This is the unboxing and review of the Xion 560 white computer case. Now I didn't go out and buy this case for myself. My cousin's actually planning a new AMD build, but he asked me if I wanted to review it for this channel. I said, heck yes I will. And so here it is. I have kind of a thing for white computer cases myself. There's so many black computer cases out there. That's the professional look. But I like things that stand out more, and the first thing you see when you walk into a room is a white case, because you're not used to seeing white cases. So let's take a look at the case and see what's inside. Now I should say this isn't a true unboxing because it's already been unboxed once before. So the packaging might be a little bit damaged, but other than, where is it? Other than these little scuffs on the front here, the rest of the packaging was in pristine condition when it arrived. So don't worry too much about that. Now this case is $40 on Newegg, but it is $30 with a $10 rebate. And that's a pretty cheap case, and I've heard horror stories about $30 cases, but this one had some pretty good reviews, so you know. Alright, let's open this thing. That's right set up. And here she is. Oh, almost. Not bad. Not bad at all. So let's just take a look at the exterior of this thing for a little bit. We have three 5¼ inch front panel bays, useful for things like Blu-ray drives or certain fan controllers. We have an on button with a spring-loaded switch, as well as a reset button with the same. Two USB 2.0 ports here and here, and one USB 3.0 port. And we have headphone and microphone jacks. Now right here is a white blue LED fan. It's 120 millimeters, and you won't be able to see it until we turn the system on, but that's okay. Now on the side here, we have a lot of fan options. You can either do up to 4 80 millimeter fans in each of these 4 areas, or you could do a 200 millimeter fan using these 4 holes, or you can do one 220 millimeter fan using these 2 holes. So yeah, we have a lot of options just right off the bat. Now looking at the top, Xion claims this can be a 120 millimeter fan, but that looks kind of small. I have one here for reference. And, okay, that actually is 120 millimeters, so, yeah. Looking at the back, we have another 120 millimeter fan installed, 2 water cooling grommets, which is an unexpected sight on a $30 case, as well as the I/O shield area, bottom-mounted power supply, and 4 expansion slots, full height. Now on the side, there's some more mesh, but it's not very interesting as you can't mount any fans on it. And all it really does is expose your terrible cable management. So let's take a look at the inside and see some of the features in there. Should also mention that this case is made out of glossy metal. It's not brushed aluminum or anything fancy like that. So it could attract some fingerprints, although you'd be very hard-pressed to notice them on this white case. Alright, we have the usual installation bag that comes with a bunch of screws and some zip ties, as well as a case speaker for those motherboards that still need that. We have toolless 3.5-inch drive bays here. Gotta love those. As well as something very interesting that I've never seen before, actually. This is an SSD mounting plate. You just screw in your SSD into these 4 holes, and you simply mount it facing sideways on the back of this. And that's makes it unnecessary to have any sort of adapter from 3.5-inch to 2.5-inch. So if I really wanted to, I could put a laptop hard drive onto that. But I don't have any laptop hard drives in this computer, so that's unnecessary. Now here at the bottom we have a vent for the power supply fan, which will come in handy as my power supply is kind of weird in its orientation. In the last case I had, the venting was facing the back side of the case, and so it wasn't getting very well ventilated, so I had to kind of jerry-rig it, but we'll look at that later. Here we have a back plate cut out for more high-end CPU coolers, but since this build is just using the stock cooler, so no need for that. These standoffs for the motherboard are already mounted. Very nice touch there. I appreciate that a lot. So in the front panel we have our USB 3 connector as expected. We have support for both AC97 front panel audio and HD audio. I'll be using the former due to the age of this motherboard. And 2 USB 2.0 headers, as well as all the usual things you'd expect to see on a front panel headout, such as the power button, the power LED, hard drive LED, things like that. That should be about all. So let's introduce the components we'll be putting into this case. So here are the main components we'll be putting into this case. This motherboard and CPU configuration came out of a Compact Presario 6330 US. This motherboard itself is an Asus P4G533LA, which shouldn't really mean anything as it's an OEM board only and it was never actually sold through Asus and its retail partners. Now underneath the socket 478 stock cooler, or at least stock for this particular OEM computer, we have a 2 GHz Pentium 4 Northwood core rated at 52.4 watts of thermal design output, or TDP, and we have half a gig of DDR266 here and 1 gigabyte of DDR333, I believe. And so this configuration runs at DDR266 with a cast latency of 2.5. Yeah, this is your pretty typical old microATX motherboard, so it should fit just fine in our microATX case. Next we have our hard drive. This is a Western Digital 1200. Now it doesn't actually have 1200 gigabytes of storage, it has 120, but it's your pretty typical parallel ATA hard drive with your MOX connector there and a jumper to indicate master or slave configuration. And that's really all there is to say about this hard drive. It's not really that interesting, but it should fit just fine in our 3.5-inch toolless drive bays. Next up we have our power supply. This is the original supply that came with the compact computer. It is a Bestech model rated at 200 watts of max output. That is pretty awful. But this, hold on a sec. So yeah, it's meant to mount in the case like this, with this facing out, and it has a much reduced depth to it, as opposed to your normal power supply that would be about this long. Now this really helps in these small cases, as it gives you more room to route these cables behind your motherboard tray. Let's take a look at the connectors we have. We have our 20-pin main motherboard power connector. This is not 24-pin, as this motherboard doesn't need it. We have 2 Molex connectors and a floppy connector, because it's that old. This I actually jerry-rigged into this power supply. The fan that was originally in there died, and I had to replace it. And I had to... it's right in here. It's got transparent blades. I had to route the fan cable through here and out this way to get it to work. And over here we have 2 more Molex connectors, and that sums up the power supply. Next up are the optical drives. This one here is made by Samsung. It only supports CDs. It does not support DVDs or Blu-rays, but it can write to CDRWs at high speed. And I'm not even sure who makes this one. But this one does do DVD-ROMs. It is not a DVD burner, or a CD burner for that matter. This is a read-only drive. Let's see if we can see the brand here. Oh, this is Toshiba, before they changed their logo. Yeah, this is old. August of 2002. And we also have a CD audio cable. Now, some of you might be too young to remember these, but these allowed you to plug in your CD drive into your sound card so that you could listen to audio CDs without having to have any software configured to do so. It would just all be taken care of in hardware. And the usefulness of these kind of faded out as play buttons and volume controls were removed from CD drives. And there's really no reason for this to be here, but oh well. And here is just a big pile of miscellaneous stuff that's also going to go into a build. Here we have our I/O shield, nothing special, but at least it has colors, so that's nice. We have our standard parallel ATA connectors, nothing really fancy here either. Except for this one's black. Woo! We have a Molex splitter because of all the fans that are going to be needing Molex. We have a Rosewell 120mm blue LED fan from the previous case, which is a Rosewell Ranger M. Now that in itself is not a bad case, but it would be kind of boring to review something that's about to be discontinued, so we're not going to do that. Here we have a PCI modem. Big whoop. I don't know of anyone who still uses dial-up anymore, and if you do, I sincerely apologize for having to watch this video in 144p. Yeah. And finally, this might be the most interesting part of the computer. This is the Rosewell fan controller. Now, if you'll remember, I swapped out the fan in the power supply for a different one. This came with that fan. So what I do is I plug in the fan into this connector, which hooks up to the fan controller, and a Molex connector over here. And this just allows me to control the speed and brightness of the LED inside the fan. It's pretty simple stuff. I mean, I could build this myself if I really wanted to with a potentiometer, but thankfully I don't have to. So those are the components. Let's get to work. Okay, the first thing we need to do is install the I/O panel shield into the back of the case. Otherwise, there's not going to be any way to install it once the motherboard is already in the case, and that's no fun. So let's put that in now. It should just snap in like most cases do with a little effort. maybe. There's one side. And another. I think that'll do, actually. Yeah, we'll call that good. Next step is to install the motherboard. Now, since we have the standoffs already screwed into the motherboard, which is a very convenient thing for Xion to have done for us, all we have to do is line up the ports on the back of the motherboard with our I/O shield, and just make sure that's aligned properly. And then screw in the screws that were provided into the standoffs. Now I should mention that the instruction guide that comes with this case is downright awful. It doesn't really tell you anything that you didn't already know or could figure out, such as which screws go in which place. And there's nothing on the back, so there's really no need to keep this around. So after some trial and error, we discovered that these small little rounded head Phillips screws are the ones to use to install the motherboard. So let's do that now. Why is it not going in? There it goes. Okay, now we have the motherboard in there nice and snug. Let's get these cables out of the way and install the power supply. Line up these mounting holes with the slots in the case and simply screw them in. Now I'm going to use... No, not that. These Phillips screwdrivers with a more hexagonally shaped head to install the power supply. Now, as you can see, our power supply does not cover all of the venting it has available to it, and that's because of the reduced depth. But this would have been an issue had the power supply been mounted above as it was in the previous case. But we still have to deal with these cables being in the way. So now let's install our hard drive in this toolless bay and move on from there. Now the hard drive is going to face this way so we can mount or route our cables through the back like that. Okay, let's go in here. To install the hard drive, you have to follow the instructions on the sticker, pretty much. And grab onto these little gray wings here and pull them outward. And slide the hard drive into the tray. It might take a little effort because it is a snug fit. Oops, I mashed him. Should probably be better to come from above until you hear that snap. That's good. And then snap in the tray. And you're good to go. Next, we're going to remove the front panel and install the optical drives. Now these come out just by pulling in the right spot. You can start from below. Is that supposed to happen? Yeah. This front panel is attached very, very firmly, so you're going to have to tug pretty hard to get it to open. And you might be worried you might break something, but just try to be careful and forceful at the same time. I know, it's a challenge. So since we have two optical drives, we're going to remove these two face plates, as we won't be needing them. And set those to the side. As we can see in the front here, we have this very thin metal covering in front of the second bay. Oh, and from the outside it looks like this is also a 5 1/4 inch drive bay, but it's actually 3 1/2. So you could put a floppy drive here if you really wanted to, but nobody got time for that. So let's just punch out, or pull out, I should say. Twist out, maybe? Yeah, twist out this guy and get rid of it. And slide our optical drives into place. Might take some finagling to get in there, but it will go in eventually. Then to replace the front panel, you just do the opposite of what you did before. Push. Now because our optical drives don't extend to the full length of the front panel, we can just reach in from behind and push them until they do. Now, these look kind of tacky against the more modern plastic finish of the front panel, but what can you do? Okay, so you might see these little black plastic thingies there. If you line up the mounting holes on the optical drive with that, you can use these funky little screws that look like a combination between a motherboard standoff and those hexagonal head screws that we used earlier. Next, I'll go ahead and install the modem, just for the sake of demonstrating a PCI card installation. This has one of those nifty external screw retention bracket. You simply unscrew it from here and it swivels this way, and you can detach it if you want. There are little nubs that go in this folded metal here to allow it to swivel. Now we have one white slot cover to start with, but it's not where we want to be, as this motherboard has the AGP port removed. So we're going to have to push out one of these, or closer to yank out, I should say. Oh, good grief. Look at dunce. We can then install the card like so. Where are my screws? And then we can screw it in on the outside. Now before I put the retention bracket back on, I want to remove this slot cover to make room for our fan controller. This is a pretty stylish slot cover, if I do say so myself. And then we can just align the little nubs back up so it swivels, which is not as easy as it sounds. And then mount the retention bracket back onto the case. Next, we have to deal with these mess of power supply cables and find a place to put all of them. So we'll start that by taking off the other side panel. And to save time, I'm going to just pass everything through this hole here and out the back, and then worry about where it goes later. Now for these sets of cables, I'm going to leave them inside the main compartment, as this one only has to reach to here, and this one only has to go here. Kind of a stretch. So let's plug those in now. Now we actually have a Molex splitter here, and this will come in very handy as it's pretty difficult to reach anything with this second cable. So we can install the top one here and the bottom one to this splitter. We can then plug that one in there, kind of hide this over here. And this connector will then hook up to our fan controller, giving it power. And that will hook into the provided rear case fan, giving it power. Now this could hook up to something else, but that's just ridiculous. Now our RPM monitor can now be plugged into our fan slot at the bottom of the case, or should I say the motherboard, like so. Next, we need to take a look at the other side of the case to wire up both the hard drive power and hard drive data cable. Installing a Molex cable right here is really tricky, as there's a zip tie from the factory that makes it a really close call and you might end up breaking something. But hopefully you don't break anything. We'll just have to push some cables out of the way to make room. And here we have our hard drive cable. I accidentally ruined one of the connectors, so this is a one-man show here. So first, we'll start off by hooking the hard drive end, oops, it's upside down, into the hard drive until it's firmly in place. And then coming around to the other side and routing the cable in through this little hole. Right. Now we're going to take our other cable and mount the motherboard end through the same hole and install it. Is that backwards? Of course it's backwards. Then with the other end, we will try, oh, there's nowhere to go. We'll try to route it back through the same hole. Might take a little finagling to get it through there. And then install these cables. We'll start with the top. That looks much nicer than it would in the previous case that didn't have any such cutouts to put your cables. So it just occurred to me that our main motherboard connector isn't long enough to route through the back, so we're just going to have to do it the ugly way, which is straight up through the middle of the case. Not pretty, but it'll do. The last thing left to do is to take care of our front panel connectors as well as our front fan. So this is twist tied up for us. We'll undo that real quick. Now Xion was kind enough to zip tie these cables to different parts of the case to keep it looking nice. So props to them. As this is an older case, we'll be using the AC97 audio plug-in. Wait. No, it won't. Okay, I made a mistake earlier in saying that we would be using the AC97 front panel audio. This motherboard doesn't actually support front panel audio, so we won't be using either of these cables. Let's try to separate them from the rest of the cables and tuck it away over here for now. Now, because this motherboard is so old, we only get to use the USB 2.0 ports and the USB 3.0 port will be useless to us. So let's just install the ones we can use now. Next we will install the power switch and the reset switch. Now it's really hard to see where to plug it in, so we'll turn this on its side. And every motherboard is different, so you're going to have to check which plug goes where. This one goes at the bottom left of this array of pins, and the reset switch goes at the right end. Next come our power and hard drive LEDs. The hard drive LED goes next to the reset switch here. And the positive side of the power LED goes right next to the power switch cable. And the negative one goes next to it. We also need to plug in our front fan. So to do that, I'll borrow this Molex connector, plug it in here, and then into here. Okay, off camera I did a few things. I installed this fan up here. This is the fan from the previous case. It also uses a Molex connector, but I didn't show myself installing that because it's really a no-brainer process. So there's really no need for that. And also I cleaned up a few things down here so it looks slightly better overall, but it's still kind of messy. So the last thing that remains is to put this side panel on and then see the wire situation on the other side to put the other side panel on. So here's the back side of our case. There's nothing really protruding enough to inhibit the side panel from going back on. These are sticking up a little bit, so just have to flatten those down a tad. But other than that, we should be good to just put this back on normally. And just like that, this build is complete. And I must say, on the outside, it looks very nice, even with these ugly front bezels of the optical drives. So now let's do the boot up test and see how this thing looks when it's running. Alright, this is the moment of truth. I have everything wired up internally, and all I have plugged in externally are a VGA cable and a power cable. So let's see what happens when we turn it on. Oof. That is pretty. Now it's kind of hard to see in the video, but the power and hard drive LEDs are kind of obnoxious. And the LED fan here looks blue, but it's actually more white. As you can see, it is working. I just don't have a keyboard plugged in to tell it to use Windows 7. But that's that. That is a dang good looking case, I must admit. So coming down here to the side, we can see all of the blue LEDs that are lighting up the inside of the case. And in the right environment, this would look really cool. Like if you have it in a dark room tucked away in a corner, that would look pretty awesome. Some other places it wouldn't look good, but no one's saying we have to use LED fans. Those are just the fans I happen to have lying around. Now, up top we have the somewhat blinding blue LED, and then down in the power supply we have our fan with our adjustable fan speed, which gets louder and brighter as we adjust the dial. Okay, just for fun, I wanted to do a dark shot just to show off all of the many LEDs installed in this thing. These ones in the front came with the case, just to reiterate, and this one on top did not, as well as the power supply. But this case looks really cool in the dark, albeit slightly mismatched due to the different colors of the LEDs and the fans. But yeah, I just wanted to do a in the dark shot, so there it is. Now, because of the low height of the CPU heatsink on this motherboard, I neglected to mention earlier the dimensions and graphics card length and the CPU heatsink height that this case supports. So looking at the dimensions of this case, it is very clearly in microATX minitower territory. It measures 16.3 inches long, or deep, depending on how you look at it, which is 412 millimeters if you use the metric system. It is 7.3 inches wide, or 185 millimeters, and 14.6 inches tall, or 370 millimeters. Now, when I looked at the CPU heatsink height, I wondered, does Xion not know how to convert from inches to millimeters? Because they list the height as 6.5 inches, but also as 155 millimeters. Those are not the same. 155 millimeters is 6.1 inches, not 6.5. So if we assume that the millimeter measurement is correct, we can't use tall skyscraper-style coolers like the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. So this is the obsoletest, so that probably won't affect most of you, but it might. Now, for the graphics card length, it lists 13 inches or 330 millimeters. That is actually correct. So you can put just about any graphics card you want in this case, and it will work. Even the Radeon R9 295X2 or the Titan X from NVIDIA, those will fit in this case. Although, would you really want to put a Titan X in a $30 case? So let's just wrap up. Overall, I am very pleased with the Xion 560 case. It's a very, very low price case at $30, and just that alone makes it kind of hard to leverage any complaints against it, but I'm going to try anyway. And also, it's attractive looking. I mean, just look at this. It looks cool. And when you don't have these obnoxious LED fans like I have, it's not so garish and in your face. And it's a pleasure to build in if you're not a doofus like me. I made the mistake of not checking the I/O panel like you saw before good enough, and so I was having a really hard time mounting the motherboard. But yeah, if you take your time, it's not bad to build in. Unlike my last case, I didn't have any trouble where I had to jam my fingers into a small corner of the board or the case. This one, the bottom-mounted power supply helps a lot. The power supply does not get in the way of the optical drives at all, and that's a big plus. But as with anything, there are a few cons. One of them being the material is kind of flimsy, honestly. If you, say, left the front panel or the side panel or just any loose bit of the case on the floor and it got stepped on, you would bend it. And that's kind of excusable, seeing as this is a $30 case, but it's good to have higher quality materials sometimes. But if you're careful with it, it'll be fine. I mean, another thing that gives me some discomfort is the amount of force it takes to take off the front panel. I had to really yank on that sucker to get it off, and the noise it made was worrying too. And the only other thing I can complain about is the cable management cutouts in the tray are kind of small, so I had a lot of trouble getting my parallel ATA cables through the holes, and there just wasn't a lot of space, especially up at the upper part of the motherboard compartment. It's a really minor complaint though. I mean, if I had longer cables from the power supply and this were made with a more modern system, such as something that would use serial ATA cables, that would be kind of a non-issue. So this leaves me kind of conflicted. This is the obsoletist and all, and we have to take into account the compatibility with old stuff. Now, the fact that this even works with these 2002 era parts is pretty impressive, but it doesn't do well with those parallel ATA cables, like I said. So if I had to put a score on it, I would give it a 4.6 out of 5, because it's an awesome case, but you will encounter a few problems with older hardware. That's all for this video. Liked it if you liked it. I'd rather you didn't dislike it, but you could if you really wanted to. Leave a comment if you just want to chat or have a question for me. And as always, subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching.